Hey guys, and welcome to the video. In this video we're going to be painting the Norn Emissary, and I'm going to be showing you how we can take the box art and turn it into the Grimdark style, put our own little twist on it, paying homage to the colours that are on the box art. So I want to firstly talk a little bit about prep before we even start to get paint on our mini. During the assembly phase, obviously you can see here I've got it in a sub-assembly. I built the miniature entirely exactly as it is, and all that kept off was the head and the neck separate, and then he also has a detachment from his base. This is how we can get into our base a little bit better and paint that before gluing it on and then continuing with the mini. He's also got two little arms that are like under his body. I call them his little T-Rex arms. They also were left off, pinned, so that we can actually just get a little bit easier access under his carapace, and also to paint those arms themselves. It just makes the job 10 times easier, and once I've got to a stage where I'm happy with it, I'll just glue it all together at the end. As you can see here, it looks like there's muck and dirt all over the mini itself, but what I have actually done is using a mixture of crackle paint and typhus corrosion. I've gone around the carapace, like the bony areas on the Tyranid, and added a little bit of that. What that's going to do, it's going to make it look a little bit older and worn with a crackle paint, and as though it's got a little bit of texture thanks to that typhus corrosion. And I didn't put any of that on the skin areas. Also, the base itself, I always say, and I will do a separate video on bases, if you can spend as much time or even half the time on the base as the miniature itself, you're going to get a much better looking base. So with this one, I just used a little bit of milliput. I always use milliput just to raise areas. I'd recommend using foam for this, but I don't have any. And then obviously I've gone in and added some like extra pipes with green stuff, added some skulls, some basing, but we'll get into that and into another video. So during the priming phase of this, obviously you can see I've primed mine black, and the reason for that is because I wanted to try a different colour scheme, and you know how to get those actual skin tones on. However, there are two ways that you can actually do this. You can use this method, the one that I'm teaching in this video, or you can prime your miniature in something like Wraithbone. If you want to check out my other ones, you'll see what I've based them in on the Tyranids. You can just fully coat it in something like Wraithbone and follow the tutorial along after I've painted the skin, and you'll get the same results. And obviously when I get to the blacking out phase, you just literally paint the carapace bits black. So there are two ways of doing that. The reason I did it this way, which is the colour that I'm first starting off with, which is Vallejo Light Earth Brown. And what I'm doing with this, I wanted to go for like more like a zenithally, and keeping some of that black into some of those shadow areas. And what it does when I do it this way, it makes little sections a little bit like patchy, so that when I do later go back into it, because I've got the paint thinned quite a bit, it's going to leave a little odd tiny little bits of those patches showing through, and it just gives that skin as though it's got, you know, some different tones in it, and as though it's got something going off underneath the skin. Which is why I use these thin layers. But I'm literally just working my way around the entire miniature, trying my best. I know I've got a 0.4 needle and nozzle just to stay away from those black carapace areas, but obviously a little bit later I'll have to go back in and paint them all black. Next up, we've got Army Painter Bleached Bone. This is a really nice bleachy bright colour, and what I'm doing with this is I'm using it as like a zenithal prime, so I'm like a top-down motion. I'm just going over all the areas that I've just done, and we're just adding this as like a little final highlight to the skin. And I also go into all the brain areas and give these like a little pre-zenithal highlight onto all the brains on his back. Next up, I've got the contrast paint Magos Purple, which is really nice. It is more like a dilute, translucent colour, but if you use contrast paints through airbrushes before, you'll know that these work beautiful. And all I'm doing is just working my way around all like the joint areas, all the areas that I want, you know, are going to be slightly purple, and we're just working our way around, just building that up. And you might want to go in and actually add, you know, like a second coat of this just to make them a little bit stronger, but we are going to put some more like air paints and inks and stuff on this just to bring it all together a little bit. But this is going to act more like a filter, so like on like areas where it might be like vents and stuff, I'm just going to spray it as though there's on top of that, but like leave a little bit of overspray around it as though it's like affected the skin, and the skin's not like bruising, but it's got a little bit of colour around that area, and it just fetches everything together. Now we've got a little bit of Carberg Crimson, and this is just going to be applied exactly over all the areas that we've just done, but we're going to use it to add a little bit of tonal variation and also just to darken up and introduce another colour to those areas. But this is going to be a little bit like, you're not going to go over all the areas that you've done, but we are going to add it to some of the areas that we want it to be a little bit darker, such as the joints and stuff, and just introduce that extra colour just to add a little bit more contrast to what we've just done. And finally, over areas such as, you know, like the claws and the tail and his like tendrils and stuff, we're going to get Leviathan Purple. Now this is a really strong contrast paint. It's a little bit too saturated for what I want, so what I've done is for every like 8 drops of contrast paint, I've added 1 drop of Vallejo black ink. If you don't have any black ink, just mix in like a black contrast paint, and this will achieve like the same results. You might have to do it 50-50, but we're just going to spray back, and the areas where I want it the darkest, such as like these main joints and his claws and stuff, we're just going to go on and create some nice little transitions with the airbrush. One last thing to do is using a mix of 50-50 water and the contrast paint Sigval Burgundy. All these vents on the skin, we're just going to go in and paint those by hand. Now don't actually do the ones on his carapace, we're going to do those a little different colour a little bit later on in the video. And then all there's left to do is, because I've got all that overspray on, or at this point if you'd use the other method, is just to paint all your carapace areas in black. And when you're done, you should have something that looks like this, ready for our next stages. Now there's one last thing to do before we go into our enamel wash, and that's all the carapace areas. I'm using a mix of AK Smoke Black and AK Ash, and I just go over all the black carapace areas, just giving them a light dry brush, and this is just going to define and just pull out some of those raised areas. And with that technical paint that we've applied beforehand, it's also going to catch the top of them and make all that, you know, all the carapace and the bones and stuff just stand out and just give it all a little bit more something to look at and a little bit more texture. Now the enamel wash is quite simple. I've just got a bowl of mineral spirits and I'm just dipping it straight into the pot. What I've got into an habit of doing, if you want to dilute this into a pot yourself, feel free to do it so. And I've made it a little bit runny on purpose so that it does run into the crevices more and it doesn't go on too thick. So here you can see I've applied it a little bit thick, and all I do is dip into my mineral spirits and use it as a wash just to mush that streak and grime around, just pushing it around. Now I've done one thing specific with this miniature. I used 2 enamels, so for all the skin areas, all your light areas, I'm going to use streak and grime, and for all the bone areas, all the black areas, I'm going to go in there with the MIG brown wash. Now I think this is discontinued. You might still be able to grab it from some shops. It's not essential that you use this product, but AK dark brown wash is identical to it, and you can use that one as well. Now the reason I'm using 2 different ones is because the streak and grime gives me this like nice dark grim, like almost like a secretion on the skin, like a sweat. It just creates like an overall nice grimy filter on the skin, whereas the brown on the bone, it's going to keep that separation from it, and so that everything doesn't just mush together as though it's like dirted up with one singular enamel wash. Now before that's dry, and a lot of people say do let it dry, it depends on how strong you want this to be, but what I do whilst it's drying is I go straight into the removal process. Now I've got these makeup sponges. You get packs of them off Amazon for like a few pounds, they come in packs of like 50 or 100 and stuff. Just a clean bowl of mineral spirits, and I'm just working my way around, just wiping it off the miniature, leaving it into some of those crevice areas, and like I said, it's going to add that little tint and a little bit of like a filter to that skin. And sometimes I'll go back on and like dab that brush, because you can see it's a bit dirty. I'll dab it on sometimes just to create some like patches or a little bit of like patchy filtering onto the skin itself. And then you need to give it about 5-10 minutes to dry, and then we're ready for our next stage. Now because we've done this enamel wash, one last thing I want to do is get a white, and we're just going to dry brush that white all over all of the brain sections, which is going to prep it for our contrast paint phase. Now the brains are quite simple, and using the contrast paint Achromatic Blue, all I do is go around and I apply a couple of coats to this. I use 2 coats of this around all the brain areas. Now what I also do, especially around like his brain and around his brain and stuff on his head, he's got these like little purple tentacle bits. Now go in there. Now I know we've not done them white, but I add a little bit of that to it, as though like there's still a little bit of glow or something going on with those areas, seeing as they're near the brain, and it just fetches all that together. Now once you've done your 2 coats, I use the technical paint Nihilok Oxide, and those little tendrily areas that I was talking about, what are near the brain, I go in and use that as like a wash to make sure it goes into those crevices. It just makes everything a little bit brighter and a little bit lighter so that it stays in line with the brains itself. Now the eyes, you do them exactly the same as what we've done the brain, and all I'm doing is just put a little white dot in, get me Athematic blue, and just put the that contrast paint around the eyes as well. It doesn't matter if it goes onto the skin, because it's going to look a little bit like a glow. And one final thing to do to the brains themselves is I got a 50-50 mix of ice yellow and white, and I just gave each center part just a little dry brush over, just catching those raised areas, and what that does, it gives the illusion that the brains are glowing. Now I didn't want the carapace itself to have like the purple from the box art, so what I did is, because I dry brushed it, I got that ash grey again, and I just went in and defined areas that I want, you know, like areas such as the head where the eyes are going to be drawn to most, and parts of the carapace on the body. I just went in and just using my brushes, just went in and highlighted some of those using like these downward motion strokes, and it just creates again that little bit more of something for your eye to look at. It's like it's not an edge highlight, but it is in a way. That's what we're using it as, just breaking them up and going around there as well. Now on the heads, obviously, and the claws, you've got a little bit of red, so just using like a dark red, and I mixed in a tiny bit of orange. I dry brushed on the red first, and then with a tiny little bit of like a Troll Slayer orange, I went in there and dry brushed onto the horns and the claws. And one final detail that I'm going to add is get our Nihilok Oxide technical paint again, and all the areas, all the vent areas on the carapace itself, which is why I said don't paint them originally, is go in there and add the Nihilok Oxide to this. Now the reason I did this is because obviously this is where the brains and stuff are located, and I just wanted to give it the illusion as though some of that like brain matter and fluid and glow it actually reached up, and these are the vents where you can see through as though like it's internal with that as well. Now one final detail that I did add to the miniature, if you've got something like Nurgle's Rot, I went in and added a little bit of that around the brain as though it's got some like pus or something coming out of the brains, and I did actually stroke these down onto the carapace as though it had leaked and some of that brain matter had come out. And the final thing that I did add, which is only available unfortunately to my members, but you can do it with gloss varnish. So if you want to learn it, you can become a member, and I'll give you a video to my wet effects. So this is a specialized effects that I use on like brains and areas that I want to be wet, and I go on there and add it to the brain, but you again can use gloss varnish. It won't give you the exact same results, but it'll get something close to it. Add it to all the brain areas, some of the vents, and what I also do is I also randomly put streaks and stuff around the miniature, you know, like on his, like where his joints on his knees and stuff would be, coming down from the carapace, and it just adds to that overall grimdarkness, and gives the illusion that, you know, like there's some like pus and whatever leaking out of this, and it just makes those areas look wet as though there's saliva around the mouth, and all that sort of good stuff. So if you want to learn that, you can learn that by supporting this channel and becoming a member. So if you have enjoyed this video, a massive thank you to everyone that's subscribed so far, and a huge thank you to my members. And if you have enjoyed this video, let me know in the comment section below, and if you could, it just help me out massively if you could just like this video. And if you're not already, want to check out some of my other Tyranid painting schemes, please remember to check out my channel and become a subscriber. Until next time guys, I'll catch you in my next video.